Greetings, ladies and gentlemen of the internet. It's Rock and Roll Spock coming at you. Welcome to the first installment of When Good Ideas Go Bad. In this segment, we will be looking at various ideas and concepts in movies, TV shows, video games, what have you, that started off really good and eventually went to crap. Or very quickly went to crap in some cases. For the first installment, we'll be discussing the Superman film franchise, which is a subject we have touched upon somewhat on this channel already, but this will actually focus on the Superman film franchise as opposed to the DC movie universe as a whole. So, let's get started, shall we? In 1978, the first Superman movie came out, and was followed 2 years later with a sequel, Superman 2. These movies are actually very well thought of by many people who are whether they be fans of Superman or fans of comic books in general. Now, not everyone does, but look at them highly, but many do. Then, as the 80s wore on, we had Superman 3 and 4, which just were bad. They were just flat out bad. After Superman 4 released in 87, there were other attempts that never saw production. The most notable of which was Superman Lives, which there are two important stories about it. One being an anecdote that Kevin Smith tells on one of the Evening with Kevin Smith DVDs. Very amusing story about his brief involvement with on the Superman movie. It pretty much ended with Tim Burton coming in as the director. Then the other source of information about this is actually a documentary called The Death of Superman Lives, which goes much more in depth about the project, and as opposed to whereas Kevin Smith really just tells his portion of the story, which his portion of the story is rather amusing. After failing to get that going, DC and Warner Bros. Tried multiple other times between the late 90s and 2003 to put together a Superman movie, until finally in 2003 they managed to get X-Men and X-Men 2 director Bryan Singer to direct Superman Returns. Superman Returns, it has it's to me a low point. First off, as implied, it's not a new start. It actually continues the story. Superman continues 5 years after Superman 2. And on the plus side, it does throw out 3 and 4, but, well, still. The movie's rather slow. It is filled with nods to the Donner movies. And don't get me wrong. A line here, a scene there, that's cool, but the constant moment, and even what Lex planned was basically the same thing, just different execution. There's a land grab, just like I said, a different execution of said land grab. The casting in the movie was actually quite good. Brandon Routh made a great Superman. Kevin Spacey made a really good Lex Luthor, but Brandon Routh sadly just didn't really have anything really super to do in the movie, it seems. I can't think of any moments off the top of my head in Superman Returns that made me think, oh wow, that's a Superman moment right there. The movie did do well enough that a sequel was initially planned and then shelved after Batman Begins came out. And so work began after Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy really got going. Work began on Man of Steel. Man of Steel, however, it is a reboot of Superman. Good. But what was needed? But it suffers from Dark Knight syndrome. Now, what is Dark Knight syndrome? Basically, it's a thought that if you make a superhero movie dark and grim and gritty, it's going to automatically be good. Now, that works for Batman. That really does. I mean, seriously, look. It worked for Batman. It really did. But Superman is not the same kind of character as Batman, and they are flip sides of the same coin. I believe it was in the Batman story Hush. Batman remarks about hating Metropolis because it's never dark there, whereas Gotham, it's actually kind of dark in the middle of the day. That's just because of the way the buildings are. But Man of Steel just doesn't have that hopeful feel that a Superman movie should have, and it feels rather bleak. Which, I mean, a Batman movie should feel bleak, but not a Superman movie. Another problem, at least in my opinion, maybe some people have other thoughts, but the huge revisions to history and origins and how things work. Krypton, I don't think I've ever seen Krypton look like that. Krypton is supposed to have a very cold look, not look like Vulcan, basically. But again, that's what I remember from years of comic books and also the Donner movies. Now, Lois knowing that Clark is Superman. This is a good thing and a bad thing. On the one hand, let's be honest, it's hard to buy that Lois Lane is this brilliant reporter if a pair of glasses is all it takes to fool her. But on the other hand, it does take away part of the personal side of the Superman stories, because you don't have those moments of, maybe Clark tries to ask Lois out and she figures, oh yeah, dinner with a friend, and he's thinking, oh, I'm going on a date with Lois. But in fact, she makes it clear she's really into Superman. But also, no kryptonite, which I hope that is just a no kryptonite yet. But there was no need for it in this movie. Another issue I had was the physical absence of Lex Luthor. Now, his presence is still felt. You see various LexCorp signs and vehicles throughout the movie, but you don't actually see Lex himself. And that, I think, was a misstep. Next up, General Zod was a poor choice of a villain in this movie. General Zod is a great Superman villain. He really is. If for no other reason, he is equal to Superman power-wise. And he knows... He even shows he knows he can adapt to the powers under the yellow sun, which actually reminds me of another problem with the revisions was the whole Codex thing. That was kind of lame. But using Zod for the initial villain for Superman, that just, for one thing, it could be said, one could easily say, well, yeah, of course he didn't want to destroy, Superman didn't want Zod to destroy us. He wants to rule us, and he wants to rule us. And how can he rule us if we've been destroyed? Which, in fact, this will actually make Lex Luthor, when he shows up in Superman vs. Batman, or as I like to call it, the Justice League prologue, it will actually make him seem justified as opposed to paranoid. And to be perfectly honest, Lex should seem more paranoid than justified. Some better choices for a villain would have been either Metallo, which would have made for an excellent means of having Lex as a not direct villain, but somewhat of an antagonist, or Brainiac, if you wanted to use one thing, but neither have been used in movies, and it would actually kind of go with the formula where they're choosing to work with, which is the more, to a degree, using the Christopher Nolan formula that worked for the Batman movies. The reason I say that either Metal or Brainiac would have worked a lot better is that, or would have worked with the formula better, is who was the villain in Batman Begins? Scarecrow or Ra's al Ghul? If anything, you knew him from the cartoon, or the comics if you read the comics, but that was it. Zod, come on, Superman 2 was Zod's movie. The whole kneel before Zod. I mean, that's one of the great lines. But Metal or Brainiac could have really shined in this, and they're both villains that are good to show off Superman's physical attributes against. But hey, again, opinions. Now the battle scenes. Big problem I have with at least the Metropolis one is the amount of collateral damage. The amount of collateral damage, it makes me think of Michael Bay movies. Like, it makes me think of Transformers movies, honestly. And that's not how Superman does things. Now, in the battle in Smallville, that is totally understandable. Because, I mean, hey, if some jerk had my mom by the throat and was threatening her, I would tear up a town tearing him up. So, yeah, that's totally viable. But he could have easily have gotten Zod out of Metropolis and just wailed on him out of people. Or at least as much as possible away from people. Away from a highly populated city. But instead, they decided to destroy a major city. Which I will say makes for a distinct difference between Man of Steel and Superman Returns, is the fact that whereas people call Superman Returns boring sometimes, not always, but not always, not everyone, but sometimes, some people. Man of Steel was anything but boring. The action was very frenetic. That's one of those things that Zack Snyder specializes in. But, well, he can do plot well. Watchmen, he actually handled that very well. But that's different thing for a different day. Anyway, that's really all I got about things. I hope that maybe over time the Superman movies will improve to a point where we get that balance that the Donner movies had, without being love letters to the Donner movies. As always, I'm the Rock and Roll Spock. Follow me on Twitter, like my Facebook page, subscribe to the channel, share the video, like the video. All social media links are down below. That's all I got for today. Live long, rock hard.